Chapter 3. The Gold Necklace. They all met at around midday in the principal's office. Yumi, Odd, and Richard were seated some distance away from their group of adults, composed of Principal Delmas, Professor Hertz, and the group's parents, Walter Stern, Michael Belpois, the Della Robbias, and the Ishiyamas. The adults had woken up later in the morning. Their faces were deeply marked by fatigue and preoccupation, and up until now they hadn't done anything but argue. The Ishiyamas wanted to call the police. The principal wished to evacuate the students. They had to warn someone. They had to... "That's enough!" Odd finally yelled. Everyone turned to look at him. His parents gave him a more serious look, as if to tell him to leave the talking to the grown-ups. But Odd was definitely not the kind of person who let himself be scared by such a thing. "You just don't get it!" he exclaimed. "What do you think calling the police will do against an army of robots that came out of a computer? Well, I'll tell you what they can do. Absolutely nothing. They'll think we've gone crazy. What's more, we're not just talking about some petty criminals, but the Green Phoenix, a terrorist organization with soldiers armed to the teeth and that has now gotten its hands on the most important supercomputer in history. And they can use it to do unthinkable things. Do you really think that the police would be able to help us?" Principal Delmas tried to add his own 2 cents, but Hertz stopped him with a wave of her hand. "The boy is right. Let him speak." Encouraged by this small bit of success, Odd felt more sure of himself. "We're the only ones who really know the enemy and how to confront it. We showed this much last night. If we remain united, we can defend Caddick and even defeat the Green Phoenix and save our friends." Michael Belpois timidly raised a hand. "But we're going to need help." It was Yumi who answered him. "I agree with you on that one. We need to call Dido again, the boss of the Men in Black. They know the Green Phoenix and could help us take them down, but I'm also convinced that we can't take on the monsters of the Yoko in our own reality. We need to fight Xana and the terrorists using the supercomputer's power. But above all, we'll need a scanner to get Aelita, Eva, and Ulrich out of there." Silence fell in the room. Odd saw the adults look at one another out of the corners of their eyes, somewhat perplexed, but ultimately they knew that the children were right. "What do we do, then?" Delmas finally asked. Odd and Yumi smiled. "We need to reinforce guard duty, prepare more corrosive bombs, and check our reserves to see how much time we could resist this siege," the boy listed off. "And Angeli, call Dido and ask her to come right away to give us a hand. And we need to organize a vanguard to get into the Hermitage and take back control of it," Yumi then said in conclusion. "There will be soldiers on watch, so we're going to need to keep our eyes wide open and find out how to take them by surprise." Aelita didn't know where to find Xana. The creature, or rather the part of it that was still trapped in the mirror, had left her there alone. It might even have already found a way to escape this virtual prison. Aelita had searched again and again, scouring the journal from one end to the other, but it was a hopeless mission. There were too many days in different locations, an entire city, and an infinite number of hiding places. The day before, Xana had asked Aelita to help him because he wanted to become a human being. She replied that she didn't know how to do it, and he had become enraged, and the girl had convinced him to come back. She then had an idea. Xana wasn't human. He could take the form of a young boy, but really he was succeeding in integrating with the programming of the virtual world. He may have powers here, the ability to do things the young girl couldn't even imagine. He could be able to hear her. The girl ran out of the school, towards the park, and cupped her hands around her mouth like a megaphone. "Xana!" she yelled at the top of her lungs. "Xana, come here, please! I need to talk to you! I need your help!" The 2nd of June, 1994 was a splendid day. A light breeze drifted between the leaves, bringing with it the lingering soft scent of spring. Aelita could feel the grass give way beneath the soles of her shoes, and the summer air ruffled her hair. The wind suddenly intensified, transforming into a whirlwind of dust and smoke before her eyes, and began to take form. Where there had previously been nothing but air, now stood a boy. His hair was black, he was thin and muscular, and his lips were drawn in a pout of discontent. "Now you ask for my help," he said, "after refusing me yours when I needed it?" Aelita winced. In a sense, she and Xana had grown up together. They had played together in the first city. They had been friends. She didn't remember anything about this time in her life, which had evaporated from her mind like a puff of smoke, but deep down she knew that there was a special connection between the two of them. "I can't promise that you'll become human," she whispered, "because, well, I don't know if it's possible. Such a promise would have been a lie as big as a house, and friends don't lie to each other." "That doesn't mean—" "But it's true. And what's more, what does that mean, become human? Have a body? You already have one here. You can make yourself look like a boy whenever you want. Although that won't be enough, there's also emotions, and the way you behave. That's what makes us truly human." The boy sat down on the grass in the park and rested his head on a closed fist. Aelita sat beside him. In Washington, D.C., it was just after 6 o'clock in the morning and Dido was asleep. Her office had a private bathroom and a dressing room in which she had installed a bed a few years earlier. During urgent times, she preferred not to stray too far from her center of operations, and what was currently happening in France was indeed urgent in every way. The telephone in the adjacent room began to ring. It was the sound of her secure line. Dido leapt out of bed. She was already fully dressed. She paused for a brief moment to run her fingers through her short blonde mane before, feeling completely awake, hurrying to answer. On one of the walls of the office, just above the door, a line of identical clocks were hanging. Beneath each of them was a label showing the name of a different capital city from around the world. The woman reached one of the handsets while glancing at this wall through the corner of her eye. In France, it was not long after midday. "Dido," she said into the receiver. "Lone Wolf reporting in, ma'am," said a tired yet resolute voice on the other end. Dido remained silent as she listened to her agent's brief report. He and his men had followed Hannibal Mago's army to the factory on the small island, where the supercomputer was located. Grigory Niktopoulos had discovered and captured them, tying them up and gagging them before transporting them out of the city. It had taken 4 days to free themselves, find a car, and return to base. 4 days lost. "Tell her we did the best we could," a voice interrupted Lone Wolf's narration in the background. "That Grigory is a real snake." Dido began to drum her fingers on the desk, irritated. Lone Wolf, restrain your men. Have you managed to contact Walter Stern yet?" The agent coughed, ashamed, before continuing. "Yes, ma'am. But, you see, he told us this really confused story, and he wanted us to help him." As she listened to her subordinate, Dido's eyes narrowed to form 2 tiny slits. "Listen to me carefully," she finally exclaimed. "This operation is of the utmost priority. I want Major Steinbeck, in other words, Professor Hertz, to take over. Do whatever she tells you to. There's no time to lose. And one more thing, agent. Go see a dentist." Dido hung up before her agent had time to protest. She knew that Lone Wolf wasn't happy with the idea of going through emergency dental protocol, but she couldn't allow the team to stay out of the game for much longer, given the delicate situation. The woman buried these thoughts and concentrated on dialing another number on her telephone's keypad, Maggie's number. Although it was very early, her secretary responded on the first ring with a cold and efficient tone of voice Dido truly appreciated. "You need me, ma'am?" "Yes, thank you," responded Dido with a smile. "Pack your things and order for a private jet to be prepared. I'll see you at the airport in an hour." "May I ask what our destination is?" asked Maggie without hesitation. "We're going to Paris, in France." She heard Maggie take a few notes on the side. "Very well, ma'am," she then said. "Would you like breakfast on our flight?" Yumi, Odd, and Jim Morales walked along Caddick Academy's main path, heading towards the school's large iron gate. Jim, the sports teacher, was a lot younger than the rest of the teachers, and all the students were on friendly terms with him, treating him more like a larger friend than a teacher. Of a stocky physique, he always wore his hair short, held back from his forehead with a tennis sweatband. He also usually wore a band-aid on his cheek, which, according to him, made him seem tough as leather. But today there were at least 3 band-aids, and not to mention the bandage covering his right ear. That was the only serious injury in the entire school from the battle the previous night. All the members of the small group were armed, Odd with a compound bow and several arrows, Jim with a baseball bat, and Yumi nunchaku. This Japanese weapon, composed of 2 short batons joined at one end with a chain, belonged to Ulrich, and Yumi's thoughts were on him as she swung the weapon distractedly. Several days earlier, the 2 of them had gone to Brussels, and Ulrich had taken the bull by the horns and given her the famous "You and I are more than just friends" speech. Yumi had felt happy to hear it, but she hadn't given him a response. They had been right in the middle of an urgent situation, with the men in black right on their heels after discovering they'd broken into one of their secret laboratories, and they had needed to get back to Caddick as fast as they could. At that confusing time, she had thought that she would have the chance to reply later, but Ulrich was now trapped in Lyoko, and she couldn't stay calm. "Ugh," Jim sighed from in front of her. "I should be in bed in the infirmary, not here on guard duty." Odd let out a mocking laugh. "I'm terribly sorry, Jimbo," he said. The boy called him by this nickname each time he wanted to make fun of him. "You'll have time to rest later. Now is the time to fight, and you need to set a good example." They were about 100 meters from Caddick's immense gate, resting between 2 brick columns on which the school emblem had been sculpted. "What's that over there?" Yumi asked, noticing yellow and black triangular signs with lightning drawn on them. They were placed on short metal pedestals, just the other side of the rungs of the gate. Further past the signs, they could see scaffolding on the footpath, strips of black and red tape like the ones that usually signal public construction, and dozens of workers with helmets securely attached to their heads. "How could they allow a construction site to open just in front of the school?" huffed Jim, indignant, "and without even asking the principal's permission?" The teacher slightly trotted across the distance separating them from the fence and held out his arms to grasp the bars. "Stop, Jim!" cried Yumi. "Don't touch anything! I get what those signs mean now. High tension!" The teacher stood frozen to the spot, and Odd approached him, pointing out the mess of barbed wire placed all along the top of the fence surrounding Caddick. "Yumi's right, Jimbo. Look, I bet these rotten green Phoenix guys want to—" "What a smart kid." Yumi whipped around. The person who had just spoken was a worker in a yellow high-vis vest and a hard hat, observing them from the top of the gate, but when she looked closely, she could see that this clothing was just a disguise. The man was carrying a gun in his belt, and it was clear that his face was not that of a humble mason. His jaw was square, his eyes icy, and his mouth twisted into an unsettling half-smile. "Well then," Jim exclaimed, taking every precaution to not even brush up against the gate, "would you care to explain what it is you're doing here?" "Your brats have already figured it out," the worker replied impishly. "We've electrified the entire perimeter, and thanks to this fake construction work, we can keep watch here, never letting you out of our sight, all without raising suspicions. Nobody can enter or leave without our say-so. We have the school under our control." Yumi watched the man turn around to return to his acolytes. For a split second, the girl thought about using her nunchaku. Yeah, and then what? She couldn't get through the gate. She couldn't stop the soldiers. She sighed. "Come on, let's go back," she proposed to Jim and I. "There's nothing more we can do here, and we need to warn the others quickly. Nobody can try to climb the fence or touch the bars of the gate." Yumi thought about her little brother. Hiroki had needed to spend the night at a cousin's house, and now their parents would have to call and tell him that they still couldn't see each other. Xanon was separated into two halves. A part of him, the dominant half, no longer had a physical body. From time to time it appeared between the trees or glaciers of Lyoko in the form of a light smoke, but it was almost always invisible and limited itself to studying and processing data. The second half of the artificial intelligence, on the other hand, was trapped in the mirror and had the appearance of a 13-year-old boy. At this moment he was seated on the lawn of a Cadix park with Alita. Xanon was a very high-level program. He was used to handling dozens of tasks at the same time and could divide himself into a million different fragments if necessary. The fact that he was currently cut in two, shuttled between Lyoko and the mirror, didn't bother him in the least. The problem was something else. The part of him that took the form of a child also began to reason like a child. He let himself be carried away by his emotions, and this was not a good thing. Now, for example, he was wasting his time with Aelita. Why? The simulations of his calculations showed that there was a minute probability of this conversation being useful to him. When Hopper destroyed him, he had needed to reunite his dispersed fragments over the internet and, to regain his strength, had taken control of the mind of a human, Eva Skinner. He may have spent too much time in the brain of that girl. "Did you manage to open a connection between the mirror and Lyoko?" Aelita asked him. Xanon threw his head back and laughed. "I didn't need to," he explained. "Your friend Jeremy opened the bridge that separated Lyoko from the first city, and I was able to regain my full strength that way. At first I had trouble communicating with the part of me in Lyoko, but everything has been resolved now." "So," the girl said, "you haven't even tried to get out of here?" Xanon tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. That was an interesting question. "Hopper included a security system in the mirror," he explained, concentrating. "In the virtual world we're in now, to interact with objects, you need to have the command box in your hand, but to activate the supercomputer to then enter Lyoko, the Lyoko of 1994, you need to perform lots of operations at the one time. Turn on the supercomputer on the third floor, use the terminal on the first, and, finally, enter the scanner columns on the second underground floor." "And you can't do all that," Aelita said to him, nodding pensively. "On your own." Xanon shrugged. "I don't need the box. I can send the instructions directly to the computer controlling the sandbox. But Hopper really studied the system. All those things need to be done at the same moment by 3 different people. The computer identifies me as a single entity, and so you're right. I can't do it. But that doesn't matter to me. I already have everything I need." Aelita became silent, nervous, and began to fiddle with the gold necklace around her neck. "Why is it that every time you become worried," Xanon said to her with a smile, "you start playing with the transmitter?" The girl stopped and shook her head. "What transmitter?" Xanon stood up. "Poor little humans. They never see any further than the tips of their noses." "That transmitter," he exclaimed. "The one you always wear around your neck." Aelita realized that he was talking about her necklace. "But if that's..." She hesitated. "This is the necklace my father left to me." "It's a transmitter," Xanon insisted. "I can sense the circuits inside. It can be used to send a call signal to another identical transmitter." Aelita took her necklace off and began to observe it in the intense light of the sun. "Seriously?" she asked, incredulous. "This has circuits in it? And can you tell me where the other one is?" The boy shook his head. "It doesn't contain a GPS device, so no, I can't localize it, but we can activate it. The signal will be blocked with a mirror, but I can transmit it to the part of me that's inside the Lyoko, and from there into reality." "And what will happen?" Xanon was growing tired of so much chit-chat. Plus, it'd be easier just to show her. He approached the girl and took the necklace in between his fingers. It was a flattened circular medallion, about 2 centimeters in diameter. In appearance, it seemed like a massive piece of gold, but Xanon was capable of effortlessly seeing how it really worked. He pressed a thumb onto the lower part of the necklace and turned it clockwise until he heard a small click. On the side of the medallion facing him, the letters W and A became illuminated with a faint reddish light. "It's now turned on," he said. "Now you just have to press one of the 2 letters, and the corresponding transmitter will begin to project a resplendent light. Do you want to do it?" Aelita approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. With a fingertip, she very lightly brushed the letter W. The sailor's knot blinked 3 times, then went back to normal. Xanon handed the necklace to the girl and winked. "Signal sent," he said.